This is a second recording in the series. In the first recording, we covered how informal testing is done in iALM.ai. In this recording, I would like to cover how formal testing is done in iALM.ai. In this diagram, formal testing is below this line here. When it comes to formal testing, we always have to use the concept of a test set. A test set is simply a group of similar test cases which will be executed using the same script, manual or automated. The point here is that we do not want to write test scripts for each test case we wish to execute. To reduce script maintenance and to minimize the number of scripts, we want to be able to write test scripts for test sets. You can see here, a test set may have an automated script if it will be automated, or manual steps if it will be executed manually. You may start with manual steps if you intend to execute the test set manually, then create an automated script if you decide later on to automate the test set. Manual steps can also help the automation engineer write the automated script. A test set, as you can see, consists of a number of formal test cases. Formal test cases, as we are going to see shortly, are different from informal test cases we saw in the previous recording. You have two ways to build test sets. You can build test sets directly from a user story or a requirement, or you could build test sets from a scenario, if you had already broken down the user story or requirement to scenarios. The many-to-many relationship here means that one user story or a requirement may have multiple test sets, and a test set may have test cases from multiple user stories or requirements. The one-to-many relationship here from scenario to test set means scenario may have one or more test sets. Now, once you have at least one test set, you can start creating a test run. A test run is an execution event which contains test cases from one or more test sets for one or more user stories or requirements. A test run is what gets executed manually or sent to a test automation software to get executed. For manual execution, the test engineer will log test results for each test case in the test run. For automated execution, the test results will be pulled from the automation software into iALM.ai. As you can see, there is a many-to-many relationship here between a test run and test set, which means a test run can be composed of test cases from multiple test sets. Also, a test set may be part of one more test runs. It should be noted that a test run can be executed any number of times. Now let's see how all this is done in iALM.ai. Let's start with a user story. Here is the list of my user stories. I'm going to look at user story number 1 here. You can see that user story number 1 has 6 different versions because iALM.ai supports versioning for user stories and requirements. Let me open version 2 of the user story. This user story has 12 scenarios, 5 test sets. Some of these test sets might have been created directly from the user story, and some might have been created from one of these scenarios. It does not really matter because a test set is a test set regardless of how it was created. When we create a test set, we need to decide if it is going to be a manual test set or an automated test set. Again, it would not really matter much because you can always create a test set as a manual test set and later on you change it to an automated test set and vice versa. When you look at the breadcrumbs, it shows you that this test set was created from scenario number 1 of that user story. If I go back to the user story and look at another test set, I see this was also created from scenario number 7. If I look at another test set here and look at the breadcrumbs, that was created directly from the user story. A test set, manual or automated, will have manual steps. Those manual steps are used by the manual tester to run the test cases within that test set. They are also supposed to help the automation engineer in writing the automated script. You might ask why these steps are part of the test set and not part of each test case. As I mentioned earlier, we do not want to write a test script or manual steps for each test case, but we would rather group the test cases into one test set and write one automated script or one set of manual steps for each test set. All the test cases within the test set will be executed using the same automated script, if the test set is automated, or the same manual steps, if the test set is manual. Now, let's go back and look at an automated test set. Let's look at this one. The only difference between a manual and automated test set is this block here where we upload the test script. Now, in order for me to explain the relationship between a test set and test cases, I need to bring you back to this diagram. As we said, a test set is a collection of formal test cases. A test set also can have manual steps or an automated script, or both, because as we said, you can start with a manual test set and later on you decide to automate it. So the automation engineer will be able to use the manual steps to guide him or her in writing the automated script. Let's now see how this works in iALM.ai. I'm going to start with a very simple test set here. Test set number 11 for a simple login. This just happened to be a manual test set. But as we said earlier, it doesn't really matter because the only difference is that block where we upload the automated script. This test set has 3 manual steps. Enter username, enter password, click login. The parameters here are username and password. The data for these parameters will come from the test cases because every test case will have its own data. Now, if I scroll down, I see that this test set has 2 test cases, successful login and unsuccessful login. Let me open this one, successful login. Again, if I look at the breadcrumbs, it tells me this is test case number 392 from test set number 11 for scenario 167 for user story 1. Okay? Here we can see the 3 steps. We can also see the parameters username and password have been copied from the test set. And here is the actual data this test case is going to use. As you can see, the last step does not have any input parameter, but it does have expected output. A test case also has a set of preconditions, which would be any condition that exists before the execution of the test case that will affect the results of the test case. This test case just happened not to have any preconditions. A good example of a test case that has preconditions would be something like canceling and refunding an order. Some of the preconditions would be something like the order exists, the order has not been refunded before, and the order is refundable. All these would affect the result of the test case. A test case will also have a set of post conditions, which would be anything we expect to see happening as far as changes in the system when the test case passes. Examples of post conditions for my canceling and refunding an order example would be the order has actually been canceled and the credit card has been refunded the correct amount. Again, this test case we have here happened not to have any post conditions. Remember, post conditions, although they are part of the expected results of the test case, are different from output, like a pop-up will appear to allow you to select the type of user. Now let's take a look at the other test case, and that's test case number 393, which is unsuccessful login. You'll see the same 3 steps here. This time, I'm intentionally using an invalid username, and that's why the output I'm expecting is something like invalid username or password. Now let's talk about test runs. Test runs are the only way to execute test cases within test sets. So let's go here and open the test runs. You can see I have 2 test runs. One of them is manual, the other is automated. When we create a test run, we need to decide whether it is going to be executed automated or manual. Automated test runs can only include test cases from automated test sets, and manual test runs can include test cases from manual test sets. Let me open this automated test run for now. Here, it lists all the possible test sets from which you can choose test cases. So, it tells me that here there are 3 user stories, and it lists the test sets inside each user story. Keep in mind, it lists only automated test sets in those user stories. In this case, each user story has only one automated test set. It also lists the test cases inside each test set. Right now, this test run includes only this test case from this test set. I can also include this one if I want to. However, I cannot include this one because it is not ready for execution, for whatever reason. Let me go back to my test runs and look at a manual test run. I can see here all the manual test sets included in this test run. And it looks like I cannot include any of these test sets because all test cases are not ready for execution. So, this is basically how we create test runs, manual or automated, by including test cases within test sets.